What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Indie Sooner. It's your boy JP. And as you guys can see, Trav is not with us today. He's feeling a little bit under the weather. And most of you guys know he went to the Bahamas over the weekend. Seemed to maybe bite him a little bit. I don't know, but he's not feeling well. Just keep in your prayers. We got our buddy Kegan Reneau with us today, and excited to have you back, man. How you feeling?
I'm feeling great. It was a long 2-month period there. I mean, I know you've read up and you know about it all, but went down to Mobile for the Senior Bowl, come back, have COVID, knocked me out for about 4 or 5 days.
Man.
Go to the combine in good old Indianapolis up in your territory. Ended up breaking my hands. I was down for the count for about 4 or 5 weeks. Full week of it was not fun. But
What did you do to break your hand?
Yeah, I mean, it was one of those things where it was a smart business decision. Was not drinking, was not under the influence at all. And the Ubers back from Indianapolis were like $70, $75, and I just didn't want to spend that. So I took the Lime scooter instead. As you know, some of the walkways up in Indianapolis aren't the best. Took a dive, broke my hand. And that was it. But it was good. It's over with. As you know, I'm kind of back to being active, and those 2 weeks sucked, but we're in good spirits, man.
Good. It's good to hear. Yeah, I'm just gonna have to apologize to you and anybody else who decides to visit Indianapolis. We just have a big problem with public transportation, like whether it's the streets or the sidewalks. They're just all crap. Like it's bad.
I would imagine it's like this in a lot of the Midwest and especially up to the Northeast. But I actually liked Indianapolis, and I liked it from the aspect of like how accessible everything is. So like when you get downtown, like you don't ever have to leave and go outside. Like you can walk and take those sky bridges across. Like I loved it up there. I think they're talking about moving the combine away from there and maybe taking it to Dallas. I hope not.
I don't know why.
Now, Frisco, if they did it at the Star, have you been to the Star in Frisco?
I have not yet.
So it's like the Dallas practice facilities like here, and then they've got this huge commercialized area all around it where there's obviously like, you know, a bunch of places to eat. I mean, there's a hotel connected to the practice facility that everybody typically stays at. I mean, it would be really, really easy if it was in Frisco, but I loved Indianapolis. So it was no, I'm glad I'm back. I'm glad I'm able to talk a little bit of ball tonight with the spring game coming up.
Absolutely. And I love my city too, man. That's the one thing I have to say bad is I wish the roads were better. I have a street right outside my house that has potholes the size of like a meteor. It's nuts. And it's like every winter, every early spring, is what happens because of the road erosion and whatnot from the salt and all that. So it happens, but no, Indy is great. It's very accessible. Crossroads of America, got so many ways to get in and out, which, you know, is why we are a great host city as well, and always have been. So definitely great that you had a good time up here. Sorry you broke your hand. Those Lime scooters are no joke at all.
No, they weren't. No, they weren't.
So, all right, guys. Hey, so last week, you guys know that we talked about defense. Obviously, that was kind of the hot topic. Not that offense isn't, but, you know, our head coach is defensive minded. And so we kind of broke down each position group. We went through it all and just said, okay, what can we expect from each of these guys? What can we expect to actually get out of them? We had our good buddy Jalen Ross on last week. And so, you know, he got to give some good insight as well. And so we're excited to have Kegan with us today. We're going to break down the offense a little bit. Real quick to answer this question, Derek, I'm not going to be at the spring game. I, as you guys know, I'm an athletic director, and I have a big softball tournament that weekend. Unfortunately, I've been playing this since November. I didn't know when the spring game was going to be, so I'm mad because I wanted to go. But, you know, it is what it is. I got to do my job. So somebody asked you when you're going to win.
Yeah, I see that. Yeah, Trav, it's out of my hands at this point. We'll get it. We'll get it done. Travis TJC is the one that in our pick'em last fall, like every week he was going like 9-2. I mean, he may be one of
Yeah.
like a handful of people on the face of the planet that had a successful year in 2021 when in terms of picking against the spread. So no, it
Oh
was
yeah.
we'll get him taken care of.
He's nuts. He don't live too far away from me actually. He lives like
I
20 minutes
know,
away. We
I know.
talked about me and him gonna get together sometime. That's pretty cool. Um, so let's go ahead and just start in the wide receiver room. So obviously, Kegan, and all of you guys know, I think the one guy that everybody's looking to in this room to kind of take a leadership role would be Marvin Mims. He's obviously probably the most accomplished, not even probably is the most accomplished out of the room. And he's done a lot of things, and this offense seems to be, I won't say tailor made for him, but something that he could really go off in. What are some of your thoughts on the year that he might have coming up?
Yeah, I think it's interesting when you look at how Ole Miss, and I think a lot of people specifically just go look at how they used the Humphrey kid a year ago. I think Dontario Humphrey. I think a lot of people look at the way they used Elijah Moore at Ole Miss and
Mhm.
immediately start making that comparison. Okay, he's going to catch 80 passes for 1,500 yards or whatever the number is that those guys caught down there. They had
Yeah.
a featured receiver that would always tend to have some success. It's with Marvin Mims, and I think the key thing, if you want to look at things that have happened in the past that will certainly carry over um, into 2022, specifically under Jeff Lebby, he's going to be a guy that's going to be the vertical guy. So the guy that, whenever you guys remember the Baylor offenses back in the day under our Bryles, the guy like the KD Cannon types, the ones that they basically feature. Now, there's a possibility for that where they could feature him, and basically he's either catching screen passes or he's running vertical routes. And I don't know if that's necessarily like what he's going to be stuck to. And I think that that's kind of where I'll go a little bit away from the topic right now and mention we've
Mhm.
talked about this one through the keyhole. Like I don't know necessarily if like what we've seen from the past of Jeff Lebby, like if that's what we're going to see of him at Oklahoma,
Right.
because he did change some stuff up from UCF to Ole Miss, and I think the key thing, whenever I talk about that, like right here, is that if they truly, and based on what they're saying right now, right, if they truly feel that Daniel Parker and Braden Willis and the two freshmen, Caden Helms and Jason Lowell, I know we'll talk about in a second, um, if they truly feel that good about those guys, they they decide to get two tight ends on the field, opposed to Jeff Lebby likes to be in 11 personnel with just one running back and one tight end, or 10. If they want to get in 12, like that opens up the floodgates, I think, a little bit more for Marvin Mims, even because he's going to get a lot more one-on-one opportunities. So teams are going to have to start filling the box. They're going to have to start committing more run defenders. And that should open up some more opportunities for Marvin Mims to attack, specifically against man coverage. So I expect him to be their featured guy. I would say this, though. I think the key thing to remember is that they faced two defenses last year.
Mhm.
Ole Miss did over the last 2 years. They faced two defenses that are similar to what Jeff Lebby's about to face 6, 7, 8 times in the Big 12. And
Mhm.
so you kind of take all those variables into account. Like it could be your big year for Marvin Mims, but it's sort of what we talked about, man, over on Through the Keyhole. Like I just think there's a lot that we don't know, and I think there's a lot that I'm going to learn about Jeff Lebby this year that we haven't learned in the past.
Absolutely. And the one thing I would ask you, and we'll dive a little bit deeper into this later with this position group I'm about to bring up. But I know that Jeff Lebby does like to run the ball a lot, which is something that, regardless of whether people actually, did their research on all 22 film or not, that's something that Lincoln Riley was much maligned for the last couple of years was, getting impatient, not running the ball, not sticking to it. Is that something that you feel like we might see Jeff Lebby do? And maybe even though he didn't face defenses like he's going to see in the Big 12, that he can, be better served than Lincoln was because he will stick to the run longer?
Oh, and I think the big thing for me, at least of what I have found so far, is that I am a huge fan of the run game that Jeff Lebby's going to be bringing to Oklahoma. I mean,
Mm.
massive fan. I immediately, the first thing after I watch tape, the first thing I mention is, man, they do some fun stuff in the run game that I'm very excited to see how Jeff Lebby's going to bring it over to Oklahoma. I think a lot of people, look at it and they go, man, all they did was run GT counter. They did
Yeah.
that back in the day, you know, when Lincoln first got there, because they didn't have the offensive linemen. And that's a concept that, you know, allows, I guess, lesser offensive linemen to have success. But Jeff Lebby will run it too. I mean, he runs a lot of gap schemes. He'll run some zone schemes. He mixes it up. But I think the big thing that's the big difference between the two is that, like, I mean this bluntly. I know you've seen this, JP.
Yeah.
He will run the same play like 5 times in a row if it works. Like if they run, if it's a 1st and 10 and they run zone to the right and it goes for 10, 11 yards, they'll go zone left on the next one, go zone right on the next, and they'll just continually to run it over and over again. I think in terms of what you're asking, I think that's where, you know, in terms of getting away from the run game, right? Like I think that's where Jeff Lebby's a little bit different. And I also think he's a little more innovative in the run game, which, again, I think a lot of people were like, oh, we're too cute in the run game. No, it just wasn't executed well enough. Because there's nothing better and aesthetically pleasing than a perfectly blocked run play. And we've seen Oklahoma do it in the past when you look at the 2018 group specifically.
Oh, yeah.
But I think that's what you're going to see more in under this new kind of system, not new regime, because all the assistants on offense are the same. But you're going to see a guy like Jeff Lebby. He's going to be innovative in the run game. They're going to be very well game planned in the run game against the defenses they're facing. And I think whenever you kind of look at this, let's just go down the list. Kansas State, Iowa State, West Virginia, Oklahoma State, Baylor, Baylor. There's 6 schools right there that run that 3-3-5 that Iowa State runs, and everybody's struggled with it. I think we've found, you know, you go look at that 2019 Oklahoma offense, that you can run the ball against it really well if you attack it the right way. And I expect this offensive staff to attack the run game the right way. I am very bullish on what Oklahoma's run game is going to look like in the fall.
Yeah. Let's put this question up here from Travis in the chat. Because they plan on playing such a fast pace, how does an offense like that typically get subs in and out? From days of Baylor was a lot of wide receiver screens. He'd run out of bounds, maybe. Oh, I see. I see what he's asking.
Yeah, to get the subs in. To what he's asking, I think the big thing isn't necessarily about like getting subs in and out for the offense. Like they're going to be running tempo to make sure the defense doesn't get subs in and out. And maybe that's what Travis is asking, but that's probably the biggest difference between, you know, you look at the past 4 or 5 years, like Lincoln really slowed it down, got his quarterback in the right play call he wanted to get in, get everybody on the same page. Even if it's a second on the play clock, it's fine. This is going to be a lot different. I mean, this is going to be, the ball's going to be snapped with 20, 25 seconds on the play clock, and they're going to run a lot of plays. They ran like 82 point something plays a year ago, just maybe north of 80. Lincoln Riley, I think, ran 67. I mean, that's a full drive, and sometimes even 2 full drives more that Ole Miss was getting a game because of their pace. And so it's going to be more about forcing opposing defenses to have to keep their same personnel on the field, to not be able to sub their defensive linemen in and out, because they'll catch them and get an offsides penalty or too many guys on the field.
Yeah, it makes sense. So going back to our position group of wide receivers, who's somebody that you might see as a dark horse candidate, if you will, in that wide receiver room that we're not really thinking about right now?
Yeah, it's so hard. I mean, I think a lot of people, immediately want to throw out a guy like Jaden Gibson. That's a freshman. But I'm going to take the easy way out here. I will buy into what the people are saying about Jalil Farouk this spring. But I think what's so interesting, and this is the conversation we had a year ago, JP, or about this team a year ago, that if they were going to get into a lot of 12 personnel, which is what Lincoln Riley liked to do the last 3 years, which again, that's 1 running back and 2 tight ends on the field, that's only 2 spots for receivers, right? And so, like, Jalil Farouk's in an interesting spot. Jeff Lebby likes to play in 10 personnel, which is 1 running back and 4 wide receivers, but predominantly likes to be in 11 with 1 tight on the field. Sometimes, then if he likes to get into 12, there goes from 3 wide receivers on the field to 2. So I think the guys that are behind Theo Weiss and Drake Stoops and Marvin Mims, specifically for this year only, are kind of in a tough spot. Like, I don't know how there's going to be enough snaps unless they rotate like crazy. Now, there will be like breathers these guys will get. Don't get me wrong. But it won't be the rotation you saw a year ago where a guy like, there's nothing against Trevin West, but I can specifically remember the Baylor game in Waco a year ago where it's a 3rd and 11 or a 3rd and 10. And I mean, Trevin West is on the field, Brian Darby's on the field. It's just like, I don't think that's going to happen with this group. Like, I don't envision a world where their best players on offense won't be on the field on the most important plays.
Yeah, that makes sense for sure. And that's something we talked about last week too, just on the defensive tilt of not having your best players on the field at all times. So continuing to go down this list, we said Marvin Mims, we said Jalil Farouk, who, like you said, by all accounts has kind of been monstrous in spring practices, and people are seeing a lot out of him. Obviously, the occasional fan, even if you don't pay attention to all that stuff, if you watched the last game, the Alamo Bowl versus Oregon, he looked different then as well, and you could see maybe that he was on a trajectory. And so, and keeping up with Gabe and Teddy's show, Oklahoma Breakdown, this past week, they were just talking about the next stage with him is less about physically, like on the field, they felt like he's got it, but turning into the mental player that can break you down in different ways, and also just some off the field stuff. Not that he's doing anything crazy, but just maturing essentially like that. So I think those are your two that we've said we could see kind of being maybe the top two guys, and we haven't even gotten to somebody who hasn't really had a huge opportunity to shine. He's had spurts. I'm sure you know who I'm getting at. 4 and 5 star Theo Weiss. And he's somebody that is fully healthy now and is looking to make his impact in this offense. What are your thoughts on Theo and the year he might have?
Yeah, he's not an elite athlete. I think that's the first thing you got to get out. And I think we all know that at this point. He's 6'2", but he plays like a big bodied possession receiver. Mm-hmm. This is a guy, whenever you break down the 2020 tape, one, I'm not sitting here and saying throw the drop out. I promise you that's not what I'm saying here. But when you talk to people specifically, I had this conversation in Indianapolis with some analytics crews that were up there that are tied to the NFL, and like drops are more considered variance to them. So like they don't see in the NFL that if a guy has a bunch of drops one year that it's going to correlate between year to year. So I'm not saying throw it out the window. It's worth remembering he dropped like 7 touchdowns. I forgot what the number was. It was more like 4 or 5. But he dropped a ton of touchdowns, dropped a ton of passes in 2020. And a lot of people remember that. And so I wanted to point out, at least in the last week, that when you go back and watch the tape, he is so technically sound. Like in terms of getting in and out of his cuts, knowing his route tree, and I think the other thing is too, he knows how to use his body to gain separation. So if he's able to if he's able to win at the line of scrimmage with his release, he's able to keep a guy on his hip. He's able to then, essentially he's already won the route. He just has to make his cut at that point. And Theo Weiss knows that. I think he's in for a bigger year than maybe some people said. I think I put on my video this last week, JP, about 750 to 800 yards. Like, that wouldn't surprise me at all if he has a year like that. And I think it's from the aspect of, like, I don't look at Marvin Mims as a guy that's just going to go, okay, one-on-one, get open immediately. I don't know if I trust him like that. I don't know if I trust Drake Stoops like that. I trust him to catch the ball. I trust Theo Weiss to get open. I trust him to give his quarterback an opportunity to get him the ball in a big situation, to move the chains and do stuff like that. And so I think the thing that people need to remember, he's very technically sound, runs great routes. Even as a bigger body guy that's not an elite athlete, he sinks his hips well, change of direction's great, again, I just want to repeat, he runs great routes. And I'm very excited to see what we see of Theo Weiss this year.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's the best thing you can hope for in a wide receiver is obviously you have flashy stuff, you can make catches, but can you get open for your quarterback? And so that's going to be exciting to see. Obviously under them, we have Drake Stoops, who's as reliable as ever, as you said before, and has made tons of big catches in his career, and I don't think that that's going to change anytime soon. And then I'm not trying to go off the top of my head here. I should have wrote it down. I'm not mistaken. Those are our top four. Then we have Trayvon West and Brian Darby in that room as well. And then you have Nick Anderson and Jaden Gibson. That fills out that room, correct?
Yes. Yeah.
That's everybody.
That's what I have. I mean, I kind of do it too deep with the receivers, and if anything else comes from that, great. If not, great. Right. Like I would probably put Cody Jackson behind Jaleel
Cody Jackson.
And I think someone wanted us to talk about him. He was better a year ago than I expected him to be as a freshman. He's a little bit bigger than what I expected him to be. He's got a little more length than what I expected him to be. And I think this is a guy that is probably, 4-year guy. And I think a lot of people, and just from my perspective here, being up at the combine and doing what I do nowadays, JP, I think it's changed my perspective a lot. Having a guy like Theo Weiss that was a 5-star guy, right? But he's got all the talent in the world. He may not be an elite athlete. He may not be a first-round pick. Even if he has production for 4 years, that's great. A guy like Cody Jackson, right? Jaleel Farouk, he may be a little bit better athlete and maybe fit in that NFL conversation a little bit better. Mm-hmm. But a guy like Cody Jackson, having a guy that can produce for 4 years is so hard to find. Yeah. And so after this year's done, I mean, you got Jaleel Farouk that's coming in behind Theo Weiss. Depending on the year Marvin Mims has, he could go on to the NFL draft. There's going to be opportunities open up for some of these guys that are behind. This first kind of 2 deep of receivers. And I think it's pretty clear. And I think they've made it through the media pretty clear of Jaden Gibson's a guy that we really like. He's a freshman. He's got stuff he wants to work on. He's making big plays. He's an athlete like we haven't had before. And yes, that can all be true, but he's probably not as good as Theo Weiss and Jaleel Farouk right now. And so I think it's pretty clear there. I think it's clear behind Drake Stoops. It's him and Darby. More than likely kind of at that Nick Basquin, Miles T's position. Yeah. And then you have Marvin Mims and Trevin West, who, from what I understand, is the fastest player on the team.
Right.
So we'll see how that translates and continues to translate heading into his 3rd year at Oklahoma.
Absolutely. And, to your point of Jaden Gibson, we talked about this in the last couple of weeks. I think we just – where a lot of fans, we're so, especially in Oklahoma, our fan base is so invested by and large in recruiting. Get to know these guys. I mean, I'm sure you're in chats and people send things to you all the time of kids in 2025 now, or even 2024 that we're already like, oh my gosh, did you see this kid? Did you see his tape? And these are general fans on Twitter, and so we get so invested into these kids. And they're 4-star, 5-star, and we see how talented they are, and we're keeping up with them. And then they get into, our school, and if they're not playing the first year, some fans are like, well, what's going on? Why are they not on the field? Why are they not being seen? And Teddy and Gabe made a great point on one of their shows. They just said, you want a program where that's not happening, where you're not seeing true freshmen.
You prefer it to be like Ohio State, where you have 3 straight years where a first-year DB is getting picked in the first round. Yeah. Like a guy that has to sit for a couple years, maybe 3 years, because he's behind somebody really good. He can step in, and then guess what? He's a first-rounder as well. And I think that's where Oklahoma was heading. They recruited, and we've talked about this before, they recruited at such a thin margin. And even at receiver, I mean, you're seeing it play out right now. And this is nothing against Trevin West. It's nothing against Drake Stoops. It's nothing against Brian Darby. But if those are the 3 guys that are behind at Alabama or behind at Georgia or behind Ohio State, their fans are losing their minds.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So, they recruited at such a thin margin. It didn't work. This is kind of the hand that they have. And it's a really good one. I've even made the comment that I think it could be a top 3 skill unit, and we'll talk about the rest of the guys here in a sec. I think it'd be a top 3 skill unit in the Big 12 this year.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's move on to the guys that do a little bit of the dirty work, but they catch passes too, the tight ends. And so you had mentioned earlier kind of the 4 tight ends that, they feel good about. Obviously, Weight Room Willie and Braden Willis. We got Daniel Parker Jr., got Caden Helms. And then How do you say his last name? Jason, what's his last name?
Llewellyn.
Llewellyn. Okay. Jason Llewellyn as well. And so those are the guys, we're looking to compete at that tight end position. And obviously, Braden Willis is the elder statesman in that group. Came back for his senior year. And by all accounts, he's ready to go. I mean, looking good, doing great things. I think Schmitty is really, him and Schmitty seem to hit it off. Obviously not that he loves everything Schmitty has him doing, but just listening to him on their podcast on the prairie, he's really embraced it. You can tell in his body composition and just some of the things you're hearing that he's doing in practice. So give me your impression on Braden.
Yeah, I think he just hasn't been healthy. And I think a lot of people forget that. I mean, he wasn't healthy in 2020. In 2019, I think maybe that would have been his true freshman year or his second year. He got hurt as well. In 2020, he hurt his hip the second game of the year against Kansas State and then didn't come back until the Baylor game in 2020. So like a year ago was maybe his first full year of like being in a role the way he was. And I think he was in a tough spot with him and Stogner and Hall, and he was splitting reps. And so put that all there. This is a guy that obviously program guy. I think a lot of people love them some Braden Willis. And he's a guy that's a solid contributor. And I think that, again, kind of like what we were just talking about a second ago, like I think people get lost in that. Like they need Braden Willis to go catch, 600 yards and catch touchdowns and do this. And I just want people to be crystal clear on this. Like Kenny Yeboah for Ole Miss 2 years ago caught like 600 yards, 500 yards as a tight end. A year ago, that wasn't the case. I mean, their tight end, I think, caught like 270. So that position is going to be interesting to follow at Oklahoma under Jeff Lebby, because I think it can go one of two ways. Either they're going to utilize it and get big and run the football a little bit more out of that two tight end group, or it's going to thin out and you're going to have Braden Willis be featured more and be on the field more. And you're going to have Daniel Parker by himself on the field more. I will say this, I'm saying this cautiously here. I do think it's of the group, and I think the offensive line obviously has the lowest floor from what we've seen in the last couple of years. But I do think this group kind of has the lowest ceiling, and I hate using those like that kind of conversation. But the aspect of like, I don't know if they have an NFL tight end right now. Braden Willis could certainly build into that. Like you wouldn't surprise me at all. He's got to block a little bit better. He's got to come down with some of those more contested catches, which we know he can do that.
Absolutely.
And so I think that with Braden Willis, he's going to get the opportunity first. I think he's going to be a captain on this team. I think he's the guy in the locker room that when shit hits the fan, pardon my French, I don't know if I can cuss on here.
Of course.
When that happens, like I think people in the locker room will look at him. And I think that could be way more important than anything Braden Willis does on the football field this year. And so I think the world of Braden Willis as a person, even listen to some of their podcasts. So we'll certainly see.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I have a question for you. Now, I've done a little bit of research into Daniel Parker Jr. From what I understand, his main shtick is blocking. He gets his nose dirty, gets in there.
One of the weirdest things.
Yeah. So I don't know how he works out, in the receiving portion of things. Again, I haven't seen anything on that, but I'm sure that you have done more research into that than I have. So do you think that we see him be a big factor in the passing game this year? Or you think he's going to be using more jumbo packages?
Yeah, he's a blocker, and it's very apparent. I think I've seen some testing numbers, like he's in the high 4.7s, like mid 4.8s runner as a tight at that size, which is again very athletic. Yeah. But compared to what I think some people brought up a Mark Andrews thing here, or even a Grant Calcaterra. Certainly not that. Certainly nothing of those. I don't think he's even as talented as a guy like Braden Willis is. Daniel Parker at Missouri is purely a blocker, and he didn't run great routes, but he's physical. And whenever I mentioned a second ago, right? That I think this thing's going to go one of two ways. Either they're going to use Willis and Parker together a lot, or only one of them is going to be featured. I would imagine if Parker's on the field, Parker's going to be asked to block a lot and do a lot less pass catching. And so it'll be interesting to see. And I want to note that I think it'll be interesting to see how teams defend that. So like when 88 comes on the field or whatever number he is now, like do they commit more guys to the run game? And then how does Oklahoma counter that? I mean, we're 6 months away from the season. It's a little too early to talk about game plans and in and out of games, week to week. But I'm certainly interested to see how they utilize Daniel Parker, and that they don't use him to a point to where teams know when he's on the field what Oklahoma's going to do.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you look at it from two perspectives. I think you can look at it from one perspective of as Oklahoma. In a lot of games, you have, in most of the games, especially in the Big 12, you have the most talent on the field. And so it's like you look at it, even if they do know what we're going to do, we're going to go out and smash them in the mouth. But then you can look at it from a different perspective, too, of is there going to be gamesmanship that Levy plays with him? Or, everybody thinks, oh, you're going to run. And, the 10th time he does a play action rollout fake, something like that, right? Gets him open in the flat. Hopefully he catches the ball. Never know. But just things to think about for sure. I want to pose this question from TJ. This is what he's heard that, man, I'm going to let you say that because looking at it,
it's surrounding Jason Llewellyn. I mean, he shows up at 6'6", like 260. A lot of the older Oklahoma fans will remember Lane Johnson, which it's featured here underneath. Basically came in as a tight end. They say, hey, you're pretty athletic. You got long arms. You're a little mean. How about you come play some tackle for us? I actually don't see Jason Llewellyn as that. I'm not going to sit here and say like he can't put on 30 more pounds or 35, 40 more pounds. But I kind of think where he's at now is where he's going to be, or 265 or 270. Like, I don't know if his body type necessarily fits that, 6'6", arms down to his knees, already 260 pounds, and can put on, his frame can carry 30, 40 pounds. Like if Jason Llewellyn carried 30 or 40 pounds, like I don't know if he's an Oklahoma football player, right? Like it may not be the case. Now, it's certainly interesting, and if it came down to it, I bet that's an experiment Oklahoma, that's a road that they would go down. But I would imagine that they're going to try to avoid that at all costs. Because I like Jason Llewellyn. I mean, I whenever you look at how Ole Miss likes to use their tight ends, he makes a lot of sense. Daniel Parker makes a lot of sense. Braden Willis, even to a certain extent, makes a lot of sense. So we'll see how that all plays out.
Yeah, absolutely. Talking about the fourth member of that group that we haven't chatted about at all yet, Kegan Helms. This is something that was from the chat that I thought we may talk about. Suggest maybe it's the size, maybe turns him into an Andrews Calcaterra type. He's going to be used kind of in that flex tight end position. Maybe won't block as much. I don't think you see that in his game right now, obviously based off of high school and even the way he's built. But maybe seeing him used in that type of role.
So I think that he is going to play a role that we haven't seen from Jeff Levy in an offense yet, because I do think he's different. And like if Jeff Levy was around in 2021, I don't know if Kegan Helms signs with Oklahoma. Like I don't know if that's a guy that he goes out and recruits.
Yeah,
but I think that can work in one of two ways. Lincoln Riley came in and had no idea what an H-back was or a fullback, right? And next thing you know, Dimitri Flowers becomes a literal weapon for them for an entire season. And so when you have a guy like Kegan Helms, where he's clearly a little more slim than probably what some people would. He's 6'3", 6'4". He was like 220, 225. I don't know his exact numbers. But I would imagine he's going to end up sticking outside as a receiver down the line. Like that's kind of where my idea is at with what they're going to use Kegan Helms for. And I think that does open the opportunity to two things. One, for him being a major asset. Just because when you look at that inside receiver, that H receiver that Drake Stoops and Brian Darby's in kind of right now, they really don't have a guy like that, nor do they have a bigger bodied receiver that can catch over the middle like that. Right. And so I think he's probably not going to be a tight end at Oklahoma. Again, like I said, I don't believe Jeff Lebby probably recruits a guy like Caden Helms.
Yeah.
But I think that also offers the opportunity to Jeff Lebby to show a little bit of creativity. Okay, I can use a wide tight end that I typically haven't used before as a receiver. Like, he just has it. And so I'm interested to see what they do with him. I'm interested to see where he places at. I don't expect him to be a factor this year. I think Jason Wellen could potentially, maybe. But I do not think Caden Helms. I think they got to figure out how to use him and get his body right before he makes a huge impact on this team.
It makes a lot of sense. So obviously we're expecting good things from the tight end room, and it'll be interesting to see how Levy decides to use them for sure. Maybe Llewellyn, like you said, can break into the rotation a little bit. I want to move on to the running backs, and then we'll finish out the other two groups after that. The running backs, that this is a group where I don't want to say there's not an unquestioned leader. I think a lot of people will probably point to Eric Gray. But as far as production on the field, there's not a guy who has had production on the field at OU. And so Eric Gray is at the top of the food chain. And then you have, depending on who you talk to, some people believe Marcus Major is the next guy up. Some people believe Javonte Barnes, with the spring he's had, is the next guy up. But I just wanted to get your initial thoughts on the running back room as well.
Oh, I think it's one of the most underrated pieces of this team. I like Eric Gray. I don't love Eric Gray. I think probably for the same reasons a lot of people listening to this will have the same thoughts. Like, he had some vision issues a year ago. When you have the all-22 and you have the end zone view, you can see it. There's just some cuts he missed that were massive runs that resulted in negative runs. That just can't happen in 2022. I like it, though. I think Marcus Major has an opportunity to be a downhill runner in this scheme. And I know a lot of people are gushing about him, and I think there's good reason for it. I think Javonte Barnes, I don't know if he's going to start immediately for them. But if Javonte Barnes is getting majority of the snaps at running back by the Texas game, it wouldn't surprise me at all.
Wow.
And that's not inside knowledge.
Yeah.
I think he's that good.
Yeah.
And I thought he was that good coming out of high. He has something to him that other people don't. And he's got a burst to him. He's physical. He can run away from guys. Like, I can't think of the last Oklahoma running back that when they handed him the ball, if he had Green in front of him, if he was housing it. Abdul Adams comes to mind. Kennedy Brooks did against Texas this year, right? But those plays were a little bit different than what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Javonte Barnes has home run potential.
Yeah.
And I am very, very excited to see him specifically in this scheme.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I've heard nothing but great things, both obviously from the outside perspective and inside perspective. Just great things. But the two other backs, we'll start out with the other freshman, Gavin Sawchuk. He's not there, is he? Or is he?
No, he's not. He's not.
I didn't think so. But obviously he will be there in the summer. Do you think, based off of his high school tape, and just how highly touted he was, he'll be able to push at all when he gets to Oklahoma?
Yeah, and I would imagine it's one of those weird things. I would imagine that Gavin Sawchuk's probably like a 4-year guy that gets, all of a sudden 3 years down the road, like, he may not be, the most incredibly athletic running back. And I say that from the aspect of, I know and acknowledge his track times. They are insane, right? Like, that 60-meter indoor track time is ridiculous, right? And so, but you don't see it, at least in the tape that is available to us, which is his huddle highlight tape. Like, you don't see that home run, running away from everybody in Colorado high school football. Like, not trying to hate if anybody from Colorado are listening in here. Not very good. And so you would like to see more of that in his tape. And like, I don't envision him cracking that top 3 in that room this year.
Yeah.
But again, it wouldn't surprise me, like, 3 years on the line, Blake Corum is a freshman running back at Michigan this year, and he got on the field and he made a huge impact for them. Like Gavin Sawchuk reminds me a little bit of him, but I also just don't know if there's a pathway. Not being an early enrollee, you got Eric Gray in front of you that I think a lot of people are excited to kind of see what he can turn into, and specifically in this scheme. You got Javonte Barnes, who, by all accounts, when you listen to other podcasts, you read the reports from practice, everybody thinks he's going to be a monster. Yeah, Marcus Major. So I think it's going to be tough for Gavin Sawchuk this year. But again, I think when you look 2-3 years down the line, like that's going to be a good 1-2 punch with him and Javonte Barnes.
Oh yeah. Oh, we're looking forward to a couple years down the line. I do want to bring this up. I know this made waves when Braden Willis made this comment on his podcast on the Prairie. He talked about Tawee Walker and just how in practice he's like, man, I don't even remember his name. Who is that guy over there? And it ended up being Tawee Walker. And so this is another cat I really, besides just hearing his name, knowing that, we picked him up, I don't know too much about him, truth be told, so I'm not going to speak on it like I do. But I was going to ask you what you have either heard or what you had seen, or if you've seen any tape at all.
Yeah, I don't know. I know he walked on. He's from junior college. He's got a couple years of college experience under his belt. But I mean, growing up, you had Dominique Whaley came from nowhere, right?
Yep.
I mean, there's a track record here at Oklahoma where these random running backs will pop up every now and again, and you're just like, what the hell? Like, why isn't other people recruiting them? And so, that wouldn't surprise me at all if they have a guy like that. And I think the other thing is like they just don't have a lot of experience in that room. And so I think there is room to have a guy that gets in practice. He's getting the bulk of running in with the twos. Maybe he's not necessarily a two at the school with deeper running back depth.
Yeah.
But he's getting the opportunity now because there's not at Oklahoma, and he's taking it and he's running with it. And I think those are cool stories, and I'm interested to see more. I would imagine, like, when you go for that spring game bingo card of like a Tawee Walker 30-yard rushing touchdown, that would probably be a good one to take.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, like you said, I want to, real quick before we move on to the next couple of groups, you had just mentioned at the beginning of this group, you said you feel like they're one of the more underrated position groups on the team. Why would you say that?
Well, I just think from a talent perspective, like I think Eric Gray, you look heading into last year, had some third round grades from the NFL. If he would have had a big year last year, obviously didn't. That's not how I thought about him, as you know, JP. But I think that he has potential. Another year get more time under DeMarco Murray. Maybe his vision improves. That's something that typically doesn't. We'll see. But this scheme that he's running in, he's not going to have to be patient on counters. He's not going to have to be reading blocks in front of him. He's going to be reading a linebacker, and he's got to make one decision and one cut and go. And so that may fit Eric Gray a little bit better. I still think Marcus Major. I think he's he may not be the most elite athlete, but he's a thumper, and he's going to do really well working downhill. I think they've got a running back room right now that has that right mix of good football players and guys that have a chance to be really good football players. And so that's what I think of the running back room.
For sure. Yeah, no, completely agree. I think that, especially when you talk about Levy's offense like we have, and like you have on the Keyhole pod, he likes to run the ball a lot, and the specific schemes he uses, and the amount of times, like we said, that he runs the ball is just going to give a lot of opportunity to a lot of these backs. And so I'm looking forward to see how they do. Looking forward to the spring game. Obviously, spring games are glorified. You're not going to get, everything from that. You're not going to be able to say one way or the other. But it's going to be nice just to see football played again, see the physicality. Maybe that happens. Speaking of physicality, this was a group that was missing a little bit of that last year, it seemed. And, a lot of people are hoping they get back to that under Schmitty, potentially. The offensive line, is one that last year, was much maligned, especially in the beginning of the year while they were gelling, trying to figure their way without Creed. And so I'm interested to hear your thoughts. And that's something I've always wanted to ask you. Do you feel like the offensive line issues that we've had in 2020 and a little bit in 2019, not a ton, but 2020, 2021, I apologize, were because of strength and conditioning solely? Do you feel like it was a big part? Do you feel like it was a little part? Not at all? Or do you feel like it was the scheme? Because I know that was a lot of talk last year, was the scheme was too much. It was too complex. We need to
Yeah, if
just do
you ask
zone
OU
scheme.
fans, everything was wrong a year ago, which I completely get the
That's a
sense.
fact.
I want to be clear, you can't measure this stuff. So anybody that, you see PFF puts out like, increase their morale the most this offseason or this or that, like you can't measure that stuff. No one really knows unless you're inside those walls. You've been in other college football programs, you know how those programs operate. But I'm going to give you guys some credit. Everybody listen to this, including JP. There's a lot of things that you guys have bitched about under Lincoln Riley for 4 years, for the last couple years, right? And I think that there's a gap between how the national media views how Oklahoma football went over the last 2 years and how OU fans feel how it feels. Now you guys have this long list of all these things that have fallen. He can't run an offense against the drop. He can't run offense against drop 8. Doesn't run the football enough. Oh, the run game's too cute, or the strength conditioning, right? Like there's this long list of stuff. Now, the national media has this long list of stuff. Half of the stuff on each list is probably not right. Half of it probably is. And I'll give OU fans some credit. I think there probably is something to the strength and conditioning of the offensive line, right? Like they're from the aspect of Ben Powers and Drew Samia and Creed Humphrey and Eric Wren before Creed and Orlando and Cody and Bobby Evans, right? Like those guys weren't just good offensive linemen. Like they were nasty. And maybe that skewed what everybody's expectations of good offensive line play is because it was so good. But at the same time, you can see it, right? Like there's the little, just not as much push off as what there used to be. There's that one run that just didn't break off like it used to.
Yeah.
There's this one call that just didn't feel like he should have called it this way, right? And I think there's some credence to that. Like you hear, all the people that are national media that are talking right now that JP gets in fights with every day. All these other people talking about OU football, they're like, oh, these fans are just crazy. They don't know what they're talking about. No, the fans are crazy. It's a smart fan base.
Yeah.
And there's probably a little bit of validity to the idea of the offensive line got worse every year since Benny Wiley got to Norman. Like it happened. Like it was very obvious. And I think, you could point to that, and then there's the other side too, which I know a lot of people don't want to go down that road. But the offensive line play just hasn't been very good for the last 3 years. And it was the most highly recruited group that Bill Bedenbaugh had signed. And so, right, like you're weighing that. Is it strength conditioning? Is it development? Is it, are guys bought in? Is it a self-accountability issue within the program, right? Like there's so many variables and things that could change. Before we talk, and I guess we're about to talk about it right now, but that's at least my opinion and view on it, is that like if there is one thing that OU fans are 1,000% I can get behind them on, the offensive line got a little bit weaker, a little bit softer, and like I said, that one run just wouldn't break out off like it used to, and I think that there's some validity to all that.
Yeah, and to your point earlier, Me and Travis, as you well have seen during the year, we were accused of being sunshine pumpers, and being too positive about it. And to us, like the way we felt about it was there was a lot of, like you said, OU fans are smart fan base, but they're rabid at times, and sometimes they have mob mentality and they all go one direction. And so it was if one person said, Lincoln's not running the ball enough, everybody said it for the most part, and that may or may not have been true because it was one or the other. Either he wasn't running the ball enough, or he was running it too much instead of passing the ball down the field. It's like, what do you want him to do? It was inconsistent, and so I respect what you have to say on that for sure. OU fans are definitely, I would say, above average in wanting to understand those concepts. Do they always understand it?
I
Even
just think
myself, all the time.
it's just a smart fan base, right?
Yeah,
Like they knew after the Nebraska game last year that something was wrong.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
and OU fans were not Texas fans, not Texas people, not national media. It was OU fans sounding those alarms.
yep.
And then, of course, this is a conversation and a discussion I've been involved in
Hmm.
on the wrong side of it from a lot of people. But, I think a lot of people it's all Spencer's fault. If we just change quarterbacks, it's all going to be fine.
Yeah,
Um, and as you remember, I immediately was like, wait until Caleb Williams gets good. Uh,
yep,
the personnel around Spencer didn't change.
yeah,
This, and this. So it's a smart fan base, and like I said, I want to give some credit here because I know a lot of people listen to this. This you guys do a really good job, but I want to give you guys some credit because I think you guys are getting a kind of patting on the head a little bit of, oh, you're just the jilted lover, or oh, you guys are just mad. Like, no, like there's some things that the fans are saying that have some truth.
yeah, for sure. So getting into the offensive line a little bit. You have some guys who are returning, like Andrew Rame, like a Anton Harrison, that have experience on the line, and Chris Murray, obviously, that will probably be out of those three, maybe your most consistent. Rame was, up and down. So was Anton Harrison. Murray definitely could have played better, but again, he has the most experience out of, I think, anybody on the offensive line. But if you had to give your best five O linemen in each position off the top of your head, just right now, who do you feel like would be the starting O line?
It'll go Harrison left,
Mm-hmm.
Anton Harrison, McCade Matower at left guard, Andrew Raymond center, Chris Murray at right guard, and um, Wanye Morris at right tackle. And I guess I'll just say that, and I'll let you ask your next question. But I definitely have some interesting thoughts on all that.
Who did you say left guard again? I missed the left guard.
McCade Matower, the transfer from
The
Cal.
transfer from Cal. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Honestly, that was mine too. I had Rain there, Matawa at left guard, right guard Murray again, right tackle Wanye, and left tackle Anton. I think that Anton, just in hearing the way Gabe talked about him last season, has the most probably upside of anybody on that offensive line. Obviously, Rain does a lot too, but just from a physicality standpoint, it's like if it would click for Anton, he could be special, be another special left tackle at OU. So looking to have them more physically strong, like we just talked about with Schmitty, and I think like nobody wants to go down this road, like you said, but to your point, I think it may be, I don't want to say a proving year, but like the next 2 years, I think are critical for Bill Beatonbow, just to show that, hey, this was a situation where the strength was just missing. And it's not that I can't coach offensive line anymore. I don't think anybody would accuse Bill Beatonbow of not being able to coach, but like you said, it has been a clear dip in production. And so you have to look at it and say, which one is it? I think we're going to hopefully get our answer, because you're not going to be able to point to the strength and conditioning anymore.
Yeah, and I think that crutch is obviously gone, and I think fans will. I think fans that's kind of gone too, right? Once the season kicks off, if the offensive line's not better, I think people will be very upset. So, yeah, it's one of those interesting things. Guys never forget how to coach. Guys
Yeah.
some guys sometimes lose the aspect of communication, especially
Yeah.
as new generations are coming in and out. I don't think Bill Beebo's either of those things. I think he may have missed on a couple prospects that were highly rated guys. Maybe they're rated a little too high by the recruiting services. And that happens, right? Like, I think it's important to note, I mentioned the Ohio State DB room earlier as an example. Look at it now. Like, I can't name a guy that's not a freshman that played a year ago. I can name one, but I can't name a guy right now off the top of my head that's like an NFL team should go draft that guy. I mean, it happens. I mean, you miss on guys, right? You miss evaluating the player. Sometimes you miss evaluating the person.
Yeah.
So people are asking about Bray Walker. I think that's a really, really, really good example of that. About, not just missing the player, but missing the person. And so, I think whenever you look at what this group can become this year, one, I want to be crystal clear. It's the most pivotal group on the team. Everybody knows that. Everybody knows the 2 tackle positions are the most, if those things don't go the way people want it to go, like Oklahoma could be in a lot of trouble. Yeah. And that's a lot of pressure, but I think that's also the truth. We've talked about it on our podcast. It's pretty crystal clear. Like at tackle, it's Harrison, it's Morris, and then Savion Byrd. On the interior offensive line, it's McCade Matower, Andrew Rain, Chris Murray, and Robert Contrell. And I think that those are your 7 guys, and you roll with it. And it sounds like that's what they're doing a little bit from just what I can hear from what Bill Bedenbaugh has said at press conferences, that, he's a little more comfortable right now. He's got guys that I'm sure that because he's coached before that knows his lingo. He's not probably having to change too much in the run game because he was the run game coordinator under Lincoln. So there's a lot of continuity between the offensive line from last year to this year. I think a lot of people would say Jerry Schmidt's back and the offensive line is going to be, immediately, see, increased dividends on that. I'm trying to not take too much sunshine out of here. I would be cautious of that. Yeah. It's always hard to tell, right? And so when you look at this offensive line group, they've got a lot of guys with experience, and they got a lot of guys that have played a lot of football. And so it's kind of up to them at this point, right? Like Bill Bedenbaugh will put them in a position to be successful. They're going to be trained way harder than they've ever been trained in terms of mental, being mentally challenged during strength conditioning. And I think obviously the hope for everybody, right, is that because of that, Ton Harrison looks like a future first-round left tackle, and Wanya Morris looks like a future draft pick. And Chris Murray, who I have put out there, could be the highest interior offensive lineman drafted out of Oklahoma a couple years ago. We just haven't seen the UCLA Chris Murray at Oklahoma. And maybe that speaks to that, right? That he looked one way. I mean, I'm comfortable saying this. Like, if Chris Murray would have gotten his waiver in 2020 and COVID never happened and all that hoopla, like, I wouldn't have been surprised if Chris Murray would have been at Oklahoma for 1 year, and he would have been just a junior. So he'd have been a 21-year-old guard that would have gone on to the NFL. He had some draftable grades out there. He's a little small, as everybody knows. He's about 6'1.5", 6'2". He's not the biggest guy, but man, he's mean. And so we'll see how this all kind of is put together. But wrap it all up with this. Like, I think it's crystal clear. There's 3 guys to tackle. There's 4 guys on the interior, and everybody kind of knows what battles they're in. And I think. I don't think you could rule it out that Anton Harrison could play right tackle and Wanya Morris could play left. I think that's how everything's kind of grouped right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, to your point on the tackles earlier, I think those 2 have the potential to be, both of them, be really great tackles. But it's just what are they going to do mentally? That I think there was a piece that. I forgot who wrote it, but Wanya Morris was speaking and just about how, his mentality was not right last year. He really had to have a reset. He's ready to go this year. And so are we going to see the Wanya Morris was a 5-star, right? That was second team all SEC at Tennessee. Are we going to see what we thought we would? Because when we first got him, everybody was like, pumping that sunshine. Oh my gosh, we're gonna win national championship last year. We have every piece that we need. Obviously, not to put that on him, because there was a litany of factors that happened last year that contributed to us not having the year we all thought we might have. But again, on Anton Harrison as well, just from a mentality standpoint, are they going to attack it? Are they going to love the game? Are they going to soak up everything that they can to become the players that they have the potential to be? I think would be the question. And so maybe with them goes the offensive line's floor and ceiling. What's your opinion on Andrew Rain at center?
I think he's obviously got the highest ceiling of any of that interior offensive line group. Long arms, mean, physical, strong. He's got to clean up some stuff technique-wise. I think he's got to get a better understanding of, how his offense is wanting to attack. And I think that was his biggest problem a year ago. And I'm not putting anything on the shoulders of a true freshman. I believe Andrew Rain was a true freshman a year ago.
Yeah.
I am not, or maybe in his second year. I'm not even a second-year guy putting that weight on him. But there was a lot of snaps that there was the left guard was looking down at the center and then looking at the left tackle, and the right guard was looking around, and it didn't look like everybody was on the same page.
Yeah.
Oh, crap, the ball's got to get snapped now because there's 5 seconds left on the play clock. Like, for Oklahoma to get to the places they want to go this year, I talk about the tackles, the most pivotal position on this team in terms of getting better. They need Andrew Rain to be their best player on offense.
Yeah.
And that may not be the guy that's the most highest draft pick. I don't think that means that, he needs to be an All-American this season. But in terms of mindset and trust, he needs to be Oklahoma's best player on offense. Because if he is, that's going to set the stage for everyone else. And I hope that's the kind of pressure they're putting on Andrew Rain, because one, that's the kind of player he's capable of becoming, and two, Oklahoma needs it. Like, I don't look at Kegan Tower's new, Robert Condrell's not from Oklahoma, Chris Murray is a transfer in, Wanya Morris is a transfer in, Savion Bird's a redshirt freshman, and obviously Anton Harrison seems to be really laid back. They need an alpha in that offensive line room, and Andrew Rain needs to be that guy. And so I'm putting a lot of expectations on him, but I think that's what it should be.
Absolutely. I did want to bring this up real quick before we move on to our last position, quarterback room. I do know that obviously Marcus Hicks has made some strides. I don't know that you would see him on the field this year, but being able to say that he, everything he's been through, all the injuries, starting out defensive line, coming offensive line, just the waves I've heard that he's, how he's continuing to grow is definitely encouraging. He certainly has the size. So I think this is a good question for you two. I'm interested to hear your opinion on Marcus Hicks moving over to the offensive line.
Yeah, a tough path to get on the field this season. I think the hope obviously is Anton Harrison has a big year and maybe he eyes the NFL. And I think if you're in Marcus Hicks' position, that's what you want to see. You want to see Wanya Morris have a big year, and you want to see Anton Harrison have a big year. Because one, Oklahoma is going to be a really good football team if that happens. But two, because they go off to the NFL, and here's your opportunity. You got this guy asked us about Tyler Guyton, the transfer from TCU. I mean, after this group, I mean, you've got Jake Taylor, who's a freshman. You've got Tyler Guyton. You have Savion Bird. You have, and that's it. Great opportunity for Marcus Hicks here next season to potentially be a guy at tackle. And I wouldn't rule out him maybe being a guy, McCade Tower's gone, Robert Condrell's gone, Chris Murray's gone. I wouldn't rule it out a guy that maybe he could slide into guard and play a little bit too. And so we'll see how it plays out. Tough world that he's in, but I was surprised to see a wrestler flip over from defensive line to offensive line, but we'll see how that all plays out.
Yeah. All right, moving on to our last group before we head out of here. Quarterbacks. Obviously, there's no battle going on. We know Dylan Gabriel's the guy, and then we know we have Micah Bowens and Nick Evers behind him. So really just kind of honing in on Dylan Gabriel, and then we can spend a little bit of time on the other two, maybe more specifically Evers and his potential future. But what were your first impressions on Dylan Gabriel when he first said, "Hey, I'm coming to OU from UCLA," after the whole Caleb Williams stuff? Was that something at the time that you had seen or done research on him at UCF, or did you have to after he announced just to see what he would be bringing to the table?
It's one of those weird things. So one, I think Oklahoma fans will realize how good of quarterback play they've had. I want to say that up front. I think nothing against Dylan Gabriel. There's a clear gap between what Oklahoma had and what Oklahoma has now. And the initial thought was, okay, Oklahoma can compete and maybe win a Big 12 title next year. Because without him, and maybe without a Jackson Dart, right? Like that picture becomes, I mean, they could be settling for JT Daniels, right? And OU fans have not been JT Daniels fans since he's been in college. So, I mean, thanks to Dylan Gabriel, I mean, they're in this thing, right? Like, who knows? He got hurt a year ago. Matt Corral got hurt in Ole Miss's offense last year a couple times. So that's obviously a concern. But the initial thought was just this ship isn't going to sink. They're going to have a shot to be competitive in 2022 and maybe even beyond just saying competitive.
Yeah, absolutely. I had not remembered really the type of year he had a couple years ago with UCF in that 2019 season. But just being able to look at some of his tape, I mean, he's got plenty of arm strength. Obviously, he's a smaller guy for sure, but plenty accurate, I think. And the one thing I think you and I would probably both agree on was he's going to need, and that's why you mentioned it just in our last segment about the O-line, he's going to need time in the pocket to be able to see down the field as well. And I think if you give him time, I think he can do some good things, especially because he's been in the system. He knows where people are going to be, and that's a plus that you have. But I would be interested. I won't say the word nervous yet, but just interested to see how he would do under pressure if those tackles do kind of falter this year. What is that going to look like for us?
He's savvy enough and knows the game of football to a certain extent that he can get out of a lot of situations, but he is a lot closer to he's not even like Baker level like instincts, right? Like I think a lot of people immediately was like, oh, he gets out of jams in the pocket. He's able, his escapability, making plays out of nothing, like things like that. Like, it's not to that extent.
Yeah.
But here's the difference, and I will speak and give some positivity on Dylan Gabriel here. He's an old guy. He's 22. He's taken a lot of hits playing college football. He's played a lot of football. I mean, he's a 2.5. He would be a 3-year starter at this point, or 2.5+ year starter at this point if he didn't get hurt a year ago. And so when I say all that, I mean, I don't envision unless it's like last year at times where the offensive line is just opening the floodgates and letting the defense in.
Yeah.
I don't anticipate that being a huge, huge problem. But I do want to say, like, he is not – you're not going to see him make a guy miss in the backfield that's about to sack him and then go run for 20 yards every week. Like, that's just not – Baker did that, and he wasn't the athlete that Kyler was or Jalen was or Caleb was. And he was able to do that. I don't think Dylan Gabriel can do that. And I think he knows that, though. I think he's very self-aware of who he is as a football player.
Yeah. That's one of the best qualities you can have and hope for. So you have a guy, obviously he's older, that doesn't try to be more than who he is. He just tries to be himself. Real quick, before we head out here, want to get your opinions and give mine a little bit on Nick Evers and just the future. Obviously, you would say that's kind of who we have in the pipeline of who may be next up. How are you feeling just about him and his prospects in the future?
Yeah, he's in an interesting spot. So Oklahoma needed a quarterback. right? And when you kind of look down the line, when Oklahoma needed Austin Kendall became that guy. You kind of go through that list, right? Like of the emergency type guys that come in that clearly have potential. Tanner Mordecai after Cameron Rising, right? And clearly Mordecai had a huge year at SMU a year ago. And I think Nick Evers is kind of in that same role. Like, is he a guy in terms of athleticism? Checks that box. Arm strength checks that box. There's just things within the game in being a quarterback that you've got to learn, right? And as guys get older, the things that, not to just bluntly say it like this, but the things that Spencer never figured out, like the not getting caught up in the week to week craziness of college football, like not, dealing with adversity and things like that he's going to have to learn and grow through. And he's going to be put in a tough spot. They got no one else. If Dylan Gabriel goes down, they have to go to him. Because he's got the most potential of everybody. So he's got all the, arm strength, athleticism, build, he checks off a lot of boxes, and it's just a matter of putting all those things together. Right. And I think, it's so hard to evaluate quarterbacks from huddle highlight tapes more than any other position. And so I just don't know if we have enough information at this point to really have a good idea, because I think when you talk about the future, you're also talking about Jackson Arnold at the same time and how those two futures are kind of tied together. And that'll be the next quarterback competition at Oklahoma. And so I think for Nick Evers and Oklahoma's hope here is Dylan Gabriel's around for not just the 2022 season, but is around for the 2023 season. And then Nick Evers can have 2 years of getting his body right.
Absolutely. That makes sense. And I wonder if he would have a good enough year, Dylan would, to go to the league. I don't know that I would see him be successful in the league, but I wonder if he would have a good enough year to have prospects to do so.
He's a good college quarterback.
If Ellinger can get drafted, maybe.
No, Dylan Gabriel get drafted.
Yeah.
It's just the step of becoming a starting NFL quarterback that
correct.
That leap
correct.
is that gap is people think it's like this. It's more like way out there. Yeah.
Which Sammy E's up here in Indianapolis, and great. I'll never talk bad about him as a person, as a character. But as a quarterback, I try to tell Texas fans, like, he's not that guy. They say, "Oh, Carson Wentz is gone. Ellinger's going to be your quarterback." I said, "No, he's not. No, he's not. We're not going with him. I promise you." Yeah, man. Well, guys, it's been fun. Thanks for coming out and talking with us. We ran a little bit over, but it's good conversation. So you don't mind to continue to look out for Travis and whatnot. Kegan, thanks for coming on again, man. It was a blast having you, a blast talking football with you as always.
Absolutely, man. Anytime.
Yes, sir. Make sure y'all follow him at Kegan Reneau on his Twitter. It's the same thing as you see his name right there. It's just the @ symbol and then his name. So go ahead and give him a follow if you don't already. Great content. He's on the Keyhole podcast as well. Same thing on Twitter at Keyhole Pod. They do great, in-depth, all 22 breakdowns. It's worth the $5 a month if you can. I know I do, and it's definitely continued to help me as I look at games. And it's hard sometimes to just look at games from the broadcast view. You can only do so much, and so be able to go and see them, and they do such a great job, Kegan, especially breaking down that film. So that's definitely a worthwhile investment, especially if you guys just want to have more and more knowledge about the game of football and how things are working on the offensive and defensive sides of the ball. So appreciate you guys. Again, stay on the lookout for next week. And I have announced that I have a lot of stuff going on the channel. Did a reaction video to Baker Mayfield. Make sure you guys go check that one out. And other than that, I don't have anything else to say. Keegan, appreciate you, brother. Appreciate y'all.
Absolutely.
Boomer.